The Trump transition team announces that several members of the incoming administration have been subject to bomb threats and swatting. Donald Trump Jr. says his father is considering banning mainstream media outlets from White House press briefings. And NBC News claims that this Thanksgiving is historically affordable. However, the network might be serving up cherry pick stats for the holidays. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to The Chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Wednesday, November 27th. Last night, nearly a dozen of Donald Trump's presidential cabinet nominees were targeted by bomb threats and swatting. The Trump-Vance transition team announced the news today in an X post. So here to discuss is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and Dave Reaboi. He is a Lincoln Fellow and at the Claremont Institute, and he's going to be here with us the entire night. So, Dave, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's dive right into this, right? How significant is this threat now? We see this escalating now with the Trump nominees. And what does it say right now about the current political climate that we're in as we're leading up to the transition?
Right. It's a tricky environment. I mean, I think most of us were surprised that the left didn't go crazy after Kamala Harris's election loss. And there was a big silence from the Antifa types and the street demonstrators. And I think a lot of us were wondering why that happened. I think it happened because, I mean, A, they were dispirited. B, it was a giant uncontestable win for Trump. But also, I think smartly they decided to pick their battles. And what they're going to do is they're going to move back, and they're going to try to fight on ground where they can plausibly have some kind of, where they can have sympathy. And the left over the last couple of years has realized that really on civil rights issues is where they can make an impact. And there's no bigger civil rights type of event coming up than immigration enforcement that's been promised by Donald Trump. So I think that's what they're gearing up to see. We've also got inside DC, we've also got very active cells of Antifa affiliated groups, Shut Down DC and other groups like that specialize in exactly what we're seeing today, which is the targeting of specific individuals who are appointed. So I think law enforcement definitely has its work cut out for it in starting in January and even before.
So I want to get into the forecast for the future and think about what would happen if there is mass deportations, et cetera. But just to look at this news of the day, this is concerning and interesting because this has been happening for a long time. It's leading up to this. You wonder, is this easily thwarted? Because once we know that people are getting swatted all the time, you would imagine you'd be able to do something about it. But we're talking about bomb threats and swatting just increasing and being in a targeted way, right, to individuals instead of mass protests in the streets. And presumably, if you did find a way to get around it, if someone was really wanted to target an individual in this day and age where nothing is private, they could, right? I mean, so do you talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've never really understood about the swatting phenomenon and about these types of things. It should be easy to, you've had, conservative media figures, for example, who've been swatted repeatedly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, now I think pretty much everyone knows what it is. You can just say swatting, mm-hmm. and people have an understanding of what that is. That's thanks to the fact that it's been used so often mostly by Antifa and far left types. Though, yeah, I mean, you're right. There has to be a way to find the people who are doing this. A, and B is to kind of desensitize law enforcement to this type of thing. I never understood why, for example, the same police department could get repeated calls against the same person and show up every time as if they didn't know that the phenomenon of swatting is a thing. So I think, we're going to have to come to terms with that. But I mean, you've got swatting, but also in the case of Stefanik and Lee Zeldin, you had legit bomb threats. One, a pipe bomb. I think another one was just another kind of bomb. You would think that law enforcement would be able to get to the bottom of things like that. I really hope that the incoming Trump Justice Department will dispense with this ridiculous idea that Antifa is not a thing, and it's an ideology rather than rather than a particular group. It's in fact both, and then kind of use law enforcement resources to target those folks.
You've written about Antifa on your Substack, and the fact that they weren't around for this transition period yet. It's still been relatively calm at this point in time. So you did say we're going to have a lot to look forward to, basically, in these things, right? Things are going to be escalating between now and the transition. So how do you envision this environment in D.C. in particular, in Florida, at Mar-a-Lago, where everything is now, between now and January 20th?
I'm thinking it's going to be pretty chill. In my opinion, I mean, we're going to see some of this stuff, and maybe law enforcement is going to try to crack down heavily on it. But I think from the organized left perspective, obviously people are going to pop off, and you have all kinds of deranged leftists. We certainly have no shortage of them in this country and in the Washington D.C. area. But I think the organized left is going to wait a little bit until they can find a cause that will unite, that will allow the media to run defense for it. So, for example, I mean, it's got to be a civil rights cause. George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, this type of thing. Immigration. Oh my God, they're deporting the abuelas, and they're and doing all this stuff. That's a narrative that the media can sink their teeth into, and the more violent characters on the left can sort of slipstream underneath that and do their thing. I think right now they're very aware. They've been quiet because they're very aware that they're in the minority. And the left's entire, the organized left's entire strategy, really since Alinsky, has been, no, we have to assert that we are the majority. And that's how they win, and that's how they see things.
Yeah, I mean, so you would say, just to be clear, that when we get far enough in the future, they'll build up the sort of moral credibility to protect migrants, basically, like illegal immigrants, and say, this is terrible, we need to protest in the streets and get everyone all riled up. Now, do you see any way in which to thwart that? Do you think that's just sort of inevitable at this point? Or?
Something like that is probably going to be inevitable, but it will be the job of the Trump administration, and especially the Trump administration, but kind of those of us on the right who are commenting about these things, to make sure that they take, that they take PR seriously. Tell them exactly what you're going to do. Tell them why. Remind the American people that the immigration situation is unsustainable and horrible, and that they elected Trump by wide margins. I mean, it must be dispiriting as anything for the media to have to report, like it did last week, that like 73% of the American public support deportations. I mean, prior to this, the conversation was like, okay, secure the border. Even Kamala was like, when she was talking about immigration, she was like, yeah, we need to secure the border. But that was it. But now even the left has to admit that they're really in the minority on this stuff. So they need to recalibrate. And I think any time that they will be able to get some human interest type of outrage stories, some atrocities, some kids in cages moments.
Well, something else that the media didn't like reporting on, and they were able to successfully shut it down, was COVID, when that was still a thing in this country. And now Trump has gone out there and named for the National Institute of Health, Dr. Bhattacharya, and he has been received online with overwhelming praise. What's your take?
It's really nice to see. I think he is a wonderful stand-up guy. We've seen. He was at Stanford. I'm sure by now everyone knows his backstory. He was a mild-mannered professor, never political at all until COVID, and then he started saying things that were completely reasonable early on. I mean, in March of 2020, he came out and said, "Hey, maybe this isn't the worst calamity that ever was," and in exchange for that, he had his career basically destroyed. So it's very, very, it's fantastic that he is, given this spot, and he'll also be great at this particular job because he will have to, he will provide a really good smell test for the types of research and the types of junk science that comes through the desk and through the doors of the NIH. So I think it's a great pick.
Yeah, one of the things that it gives me hope for is that someone like this would know that justice does need to be served, that we can't just move on, like a lot of good people might have wanted to do in the past. And, this is not about retribution as so much as it is justice. And there should be not a revenge tour, but a justice tour. And I would hope that some of these people, especially, the good doctor, will do some kind of truth and reconciliation. Do you think that's going to happen with these people? You think that some of these appointments are going to lead to, no, we're going to go into the files, we're going to name names, we're going to say whether we prosecute them or not, this was wrong? Because I hope so, but I don't want to wish cast that. You know what I mean?
I think people are always looking for that. And I mean, I think it would be a great thing to have, but I mean, it depends. It depends on the position. I'm not sure what he can do in that particular role to cause an accounting, a reappraisal, of what happened in those days. I mean, I'd be satisfied with just making sure that we return to science as opposed to ideological poison and leftist herd mentality nonsense. So I mean, that would be enough to satisfy me. I would love to have to have some kind of a reappraisal of what happened during COVID, and I'd love to see some heads roll. But yeah, I mean,
we're all rooting for that. We are all rooting for that.
We're all doing it. Whether or not we'll get it is a different story. We usually don't get these types of things.
We usually don't have nice things. But you know what? It's Thanksgiving, so we're going to be in a good mood. Dave, don't go anywhere. When we come back, our next guest will explain why media gaslighting failed to defeat Donald Trump. Just ahead. You know what's worse than coal in your stocking? Having imported meat in your fridge. And Santa wouldn't do that to the worst people on the naughty list, but grocery stores do that every single day. This year, Good Ranchers is here to make sure that you have the gift of meat you can trust. During Good Ranchers holiday special, you can subscribe to any of their 100% American meat or wild-caught seafood boxes and get a 10-pound spiral cut ham for free. Go ahead and buy yourself this and also go check out their new gifting page, because what's one gift that nobody has ever turned down? A box of steaks, you guys. This year, gift a gift that is a cut above the rest. It's goodranchers.com. You have the burgers, the ribeyes. It's all at goodranchers.com. And they have a gift box for everyone on your list. It's delivered right to their door. There's no hassle or stress, and satisfaction is guaranteed. So remember to visit goodranchers.com and use my code Jill to claim your free spiral cut holiday ham before they run out. And if food you can trust this holiday season actually matters to you, then put the car keys down. And don't go to the grocery store. Go to goodranchers.com. Use code Jill today for meat you can trust. Goodranchers.com. American meat delivered. How did Trump win the election despite constant media attacks? Have the voters finally had enough of the elitist narratives? Chad Jackson is an entrepreneur and star of the 2020 film Uncle Tom, and he recently wrote about this for Blaze News, and he joins us right now. So, Chad, have voters officially rejected the media's narratives? Like, can we please move on from whatever they're trying to sell us?
This time around, hopefully it sticks. Obviously, with Trump, and what he brings to the American electorate, I think he was able to bypass a lot of the traditional means by which the left uses to try to block someone like a Trump from seizing power. But hopefully this can outlast Trump, but that's yet to be determined.
So in this piece, you focus on maybe the centerpiece, or one of the centerpieces of this elitist narrative that we've heard so much about for really almost a decade now. And they didn't really change the tune, but as you cite some of these headlines from the last year, I mean, the Huffington Post, quote, Trump just ran the most racist campaign in modern history and won. Or NPR reporter saying, he's won the presidential election, the first time a convicted felon has been elected president after a campaign of hateful rhetoric to Latinos who voted for him in record numbers for Republican. So what do we make of this? Did we pop a bubble here, do you think? How do you analyze what happened?
Well, so I think David made the point earlier in the last segment about how the left has, in a sense, mastered the civil rights kind of champions of American discourse. And you have the civil rights movement in 1964. The problem is that the further we get away from 64, the less of a nostalgic kind of attachment people have to this notion that the left are going to be the group that masters our rights and so on. And so the fact is, as we got into the 2024 election, with inflation being high, with the immigration issue, and on and on and on we can go, the fact that you have the left who are sitting here talking about, like, we're the ones who are going to push for the rights of immigrants and blacks and trans rights and this, that, and the third, it became white noise to the larger electorate, which includes minorities, who just wants lower gas prices.
Yeah, Dave, jump in on this. Is this actually going to force the media to change this time around?
No. I'm not sure what'll force them to change. I mean, I completely agree. As far as we move further past the civil rights era, it's going to be, all this, the attachment to the Democratic Party, and the civil rights movement is going to lessen, especially in light of concerns like immigration, like the economy, and all this stuff. And I mean, the other thing too is that the Democrats, because they are the party of endless, ceaseless progress, they always have to find new frontiers of civil rights to conquer. So that's where you get the trans stuff. That's where you get all sorts of things that I mean, this is a train that by definition doesn't stop, can't stop.
I think for them too, like, this wokeness that you're talking about has become a religion, and it's a religion that they use to try to bludgeon people, bludgeon Americans, try to make people feel guilty for being patriotic, for loving their country, for identifying with America. I know Joy Reid on MSNBC, whether it's what's going on in Italy with their prime minister, whether it's what's going on in Argentina or what we see in Ireland or here in the United States, she called these serial elections. In other words, these people are kind of taking on this kind of national identity and are trying to fight back against what she perceives to be the right way to go, which is globalism. And people just aren't having it anymore. And so they're trying to use wokeism and identity politics to push for this more global agenda, and people are just outright rejecting it.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, I don't want to make too much of this, like you do want to be data-based in some way, but I feel like you can sense, everyone can sense the energy, the lack of energy, right, when it comes to pushing this same old stuff. And, you can look at the election as almost a giant cry, I think, by the American electorate going, no, actually, we're sick of this. You went too far.
Yeah.
Which I never wanted to depend on, but I'm glad to see it happen. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how far does this go? And so, especially when it comes to all these racialized language and tropes, is that really out of steam or not? Because, let me give you an objection. It would be something like, well, they're still going to use this rhetoric, and these people who believe this stuff are still in charge of all the institutions,
right,
and even large corporations. So, do you think that this disintegrates over time? Is this a tipping point or not? That's kind of the question we face.
Well, how we got here has been over a century in the making. When you look at the turn of the 20th century, how the children of a lot of industrialists who were upset with how aristocratic their parents were meeting in Greenwich Village saloons, talking about how they're going to take over the world and take over the institutions. Mabel Dodge wrote a book called The Movers and the Shakers, where she notes people like Max Eastman and Hutchins Hapgood and others who went on to do just that. And they were able to transform what Gramsci called the cultural hegemony of American society and American culture. And to your point, these are the people who sit atop academia, media, education, so on and so forth. And so it's going to be a long fight to try to wrestle back American institutions from these people. And so I don't think it's going to be easy. It's certainly not going to be an overnight thing. This election, although Trump won it, it's a winning of a battle, but it's not necessarily the winning of a war. That's something that's going to take a long period of time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, an illustration of this is that, there was an organization, still is, much disgraced, the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it used to exist not even so long ago. It used to exist for the purpose of identifying and labeling, folks on the right as, racists of this type or that type, so that the media could then use that characterization against these people. So it was just targeting and labeling so that the media could kind of jump in. Now, SPLC is completely obsolete, because now the media just goes directly and says, this guy's a Nazi.
Right.
So I think it shows also the power shift, and it shows how far ahead of their skis the media has gotten. And we see it too. I mean, we see some kind of, maybe it's not a reassessment, but it's certainly some stage in the stages of grief where they're kind of processing this, and they're realizing, like, wait a minute, nobody's watching MSNBC anymore. Nobody's watching CNN anymore.
They will after Elon buys it, though.
Yeah, I mean,
it'll be exciting again.
Yeah, I mean, heads will completely explode, and it'll be must-see TV again. But yeah, I mean.
Right. So last question here on the table then. How do we box up and repeat the process, right? Because that's what we want to do, right? We don't want this to just be a one-time thing. So how do we now just say this isn't just the 2024 election, but how is there a repeatable process going forward?
Well, I think Trump taught us a lot since 2016. You're talking about a guy who was able to withstand very tumultuous media attacks for the past, 8, 9, 10 plus years, who survived 2 impeachments, who survived assassination attempts, yet to become the president of the United States here in 2024. And so I think what Trump teaches us is, even though you're going to be called a racist and a bigot and a homophobe, so long as you stand by your principles, people will see that and they'll be inspired by that. And so I hope the Republican political operatives would take note of that, and instead of cowering, every time the left calls you a racist, they dig into those American values that made America great. So there's that. And, I could go on and on, but I know we're short for time. But I just hope that Republican operatives would take note of this moment and capitalize on it.
Dave, your final thoughts?
I would do 2 things. Number one is I would make sure the economy improves, because at the end of the day, that was probably the thing that most swung the election. So that needs to be absolute top of mind, top of agenda item for Trump going in. Number 2 is take a page out of Florida. DeSantis won in 2018 with the barest majority of votes, barely squeaked by. And yet he governed as if he had won 85 to 90% of the vote in a Saddam Hussein election.
He did the next time.
Yeah.
And then he did the next time. And so, I mean, I think that's how you do it. You have to say, okay, we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to do the things that, the things that need doing. And frankly, all this stuff is popular. The conservative agenda is actually, quite popular. You just have to do it.
You just have to act like it is too.
Yeah, I feel like your movie, Uncle Tom, was more controversial in the past, but would perhaps be more popular and received by more people more easily today, if that makes any sense. And
well, we certainly moved the needle with our last film, Uncle Tom Part 2, and I still have people to this day coming up and thanking me for how we expose the civil rights movement as being a Marxist agenda. So it's stuff like that, being serious about how we approach this in politics, but also too in the culture, putting out good films, doing what you guys do here on The Blaze. We have to move the needle culturally as well.
Keep pushing forward. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks. You too.
We'll continue to talk about the media, and we'll explain why the legacy media journalists at the White House might become old news. Stay tuned. The presidential election is over, and it might feel like a moment to breathe, but this is no time to let your guard down. And the forces that are trying to stop the truth, they haven't stopped. If anything, right now, they're doubling down. And now more than ever, we need to stand firm and push harder and ensure that the truth has a voice. Our independent platform is your ally in this fight. We're offering fearless political analysis, real stories, and a healthy dose of camaraderie to keep us grounded. But we can't do it alone. We need you to help battle with us. So together we can push back against the lies and champion the principles that make America great. If you haven't already joined us, now is the time to become a Blaze TV member and gain access to the arsenal of truth that we've built just for you. This is your home, your family, your front line in the ongoing fight for freedom and integrity. So the next chapter starts right now. Go to blazetv.com/Jill and get $30 off. If you love the show and you support Blaze TV and what it stands for, this is your chance to get even more involved in something special. It's blazetv.com/Jill for $30 off. How exactly did Trump win the 2024 election? Well, it probably had something to do with these huge shift towards Republicans. Black voters were up 19 percentage points for Republicans since 2012. Hispanic voters were up 29 points and Asian voters were up 17 points. And we saw for the first time since 1980, every single state shifted more red. So here to break this down for us is Blaze News politics reporter Rebeka Zeljko. So Rebeka, what do you make of these huge shifts? I mean, all of these numbers, everything that we see was trending towards the Republicans.
I think one of the biggest faults of the Democratic strategy, at least especially going into this election cycle, is I think that Democrats think that all minorities vote the same and that they sort of treat them as a monolith. That's my judgment anyways. I think that they sort of expected a lot of these demographics that have historically voted blue and agreed maybe with the Democratic message to maybe not look elsewhere and look around themselves and realize, these last 4 years have not been very good for me. And so I think this time around that something changed clearly. And Democrats did not necessarily take that into account. And it showed at the polls.
Rebeka, now that Chris is still out with his baby, enjoying the peace and happiness of a new child and Thanksgiving, we will just have to talk business here, though, about the future of Blaze Media in D.C. Amongst ourselves in the audience, because I'm loving these headlines. I want to see it happen, but I'm loving the talk of something that a lot of us have wondered about, wanted to happen for a long time, and that is this. People like Donald Trump Jr. are actually talking about banning mainstream news outlets from the White House briefing room and then allowing independent journalists in their place. In other words, booting some of these people out. Of course, very much on my mind is we need a White House correspondent. You're going to be tracking all things on the Hill. So either we need to move you to the White House or we find someone else to go there, right? We need these media credentials, and I'm sure we'll have them. But what are you hearing about this, and what are your thoughts on it? Because this could be a very interesting moment when, for instance, Joe Rogan has a seat at the table and maybe some of these other outlets don't.
Yeah, I mean, first things first, happy to be a Swiss Army knife if we need one. I'm happy to take on the challenge. But I think that it just really I think the underlying point here is that people are increasingly relying on alternative media and turning away from cable news media. I mean, anecdotally, that was my situation. I didn't really rely on a lot of mainstream media, which is how I ended up here. And I think that there's really a place for publications like The Blaze to potentially be in the White House press room. And I think that it's honestly because there has been this decrease in trust when it comes to mainstream media. I think that they sort of thought, they had a monopoly on the news narrative, and they thought that they could get away with maybe a lot of the false or deceptive narratives that they've been pushing for nearly a decade now. And the American people are rejecting it, not just the polls, but also in terms of viewership. We've seen time and time again, a lot of like CNN has seen just really sad ratings, especially ever since the election. I think that that's not unique to their outlet. And I mean, most recently, Joe and Mika, for example, decided they needed to mend this relationship with President Trump to sort of save their reputation and save their outlet. And so I think that it's not just a feeling between alternative media that already exists. I think it's even with some of the legacy media, they're starting to realize that they're in trouble.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, we love these headlines, right? We are sitting here, we're excited about this happening. But how likely is it, in your opinion, that this would happen?
I'm going to be a downer here and say that it's something that sounds really good.
Holiday, Dave. Remember that.
This is what I do. I can't help myself. But it's something that's really nice to say, and it's a good applause line. And of course, the Blaze and other outlets, new media outlets, should be in the should be in the White House, sort of being able to ask questions and doing that. But the larger issue is the one of access and reporting. I mean, at the end of the day, the people who are in the mainstream media, many of them who are in the especially in the covering the White House, they're really good. Now, they're really good as professionals. They're good at their jobs. Their biases are off the charts. They have all kinds of terrible agendas, but they know how to do the mechanics of reporting and tracking down a story. They know how the city works and how the media works. And, that is a process that happens outside of the press briefing room. That's the process that happens with staffers and people inside the administration going to talk to reporters off the record, on the record, people being around. It's just how DC works. So I don't think you're going to get rid of the mainstream media anytime soon, though I would be very happy to see some new media come in there and give them competition in terms of doing more reporting.
Well, you know what? I know that Rebeka she's already saying she's willing to learn, right? There are plenty of people out there that are willing to learn, and we appreciate that about you, Rebeka. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, you guys too.
When we come back, we'll give you some talking points to defend at Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. Stay with us. What's the real history of Thanksgiving in America, and how does it relate to arguments over federalism, religious liberty, and the role of government? Pete Peterson is the dean of Pepperdine University School of Public Policy, and he recently wrote about this for the American Mind, and he joins us now. So, Pete, let's break down this true history of Thanksgiving.
Well, you're absolutely right to phrase this as a series of contentious battles along the lines of questions of federalism and religious liberty. The first proclamation issued by a president calling for a day of Thanksgiving was by none other than George Washington back in 1789. He did it on October 3rd, but he set November 26th as being the first day of national Thanksgiving. And this was, of course, in celebrating the passage of the Constitution. He called for it again 7 or 8 years later, but in that interim period, there were a number of debates in Congress about whether there should be a national day of anything. Certainly, this was along the lines of the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, with the Federalists calling for a national day of prayer and Thanksgiving, and the Anti-Federalists saying it's none of the federal government's business to be issuing these. And from that point, really going through the first part of the founding of our country, these debates usually centered around particular days or celebrations. One side, again, either the Federalists or later the Republicans under Thomas Jefferson, there were debates as well. And it really wasn't until Abraham Lincoln in 1863, albeit 74 years later to the day from which George Washington had called for that original day of Thanksgiving, that it really became institutionalized in the midst of the Civil War, where President Lincoln was calling for a national day of Thanksgiving, prayer, and repentance. And it was that proclamation in 1863 which then became institutionalized as an annual day of Thanksgiving.
Pete, great to see you again. Great to have you here on the show. What do we make of this? I mean, the fact that this was contentious. Do you have any thoughts on what that means for what Thanksgiving means or ought to mean now? I mean, it seems like something America wrangled with and then decided on. This is something we need to do. It's personally my favorite. I mean, it's just peculiar American holiday. And it just, everything from the vibes, everyone knows what the feeling of Thanksgiving is, to everything else about it. But when you look at the history, how do you explain what it is now?
Well, I think it's, as you say, Matt, it's a genuinely American holiday, but it has been institutionalized in a genuinely American way, which is through debate and discussion, and really along the lines of these questions around federalism. What is the role of the federal government? What's the role of states? Certainly, again, in those early years, it was a debate and discussion of not whether the idea of a day of Thanksgiving was a good idea. I think even all of those who were debating on the anti-federalist side would have been perfectly fine with individual states deciding to issue Thanksgiving Day proclamations. But it really was on this question around whether it was the federal government's business to be issuing nationwide proclamations. And of course, it took the greatest war in the history of America, the Civil War, and President Lincoln, really, again, questions around federalism and the role of states and the federal government, to finally conclude this ongoing debate over decades about what the federal government's role was in issuing proclamations. And so I think we as Americans, in celebrating this day, should not only celebrate the fact of what this stands for, that we should be giving thanks and celebrating that uniquely American holiday, but to understand that we came to this conclusion of having a national day of Thanksgiving really through a series of really deep and searing, in some cases, debates about what the role of the federal government was versus the states.
Pete, thanks so much for joining us and just enlightening us a little bit and giving us something to talk about over our Thanksgiving tables.
Great to be with you.
And guys, I always take this opportunity to say that I'm a Rush baby, and Rush Limbaugh every Thanksgiving would go through and say the history of Thanksgiving, and he would always say, socialism has failed in America. America is capitalism plus scripture is basically, right? This is how we get to the Thanksgiving that we know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I kept on thinking, like, well, maybe since I moved to Texas, I'm more amenable to the position that we celebrate Thanksgiving as a state with the rest of the nation. We all agree on it. He started speaking. I started to feel a little bit of federalism coming on in me. Like, hey, wait a minute. I feel almost a little libertarian all of a sudden. I love this holiday. But the socialism bit goes back to I believe the actual history of Thanksgiving itself. Yes. And there's a lot of even more debate there than there is about celebrating the holiday.
I was fascinated by this discussion. I knew nothing about. I mean, I was a Rush baby too. I grew up knowing the story, hearing it from Rush and elsewhere, but I didn't know about the controversy over the proclamation. I mean, that's fascinating stuff. I mean, talk about a throwback to a different time in America, where just the idea of what's the role of the federal government to do a proclamation. I mean, now even to ask the question, I think of Nancy Pelosi. Being asked, the question about what was it about Obamacare or whatever, like, is this the role of the federal government? And she just stares at the journalist and says, "Are you serious? Are you serious?" I mean, we've come a long way, baby, as the ad says. But it's fascinating stuff. Look, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday too, probably because I grew up in the Northeast. And it's kind of the first bit of, cold but not too cold. And you have all the family together, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful vibe. Growing up where it's warm, I don't know if it would have the same effect.
It doesn't.
I don't
It's a completely different vibe when you're in the warm states and it's just another day. I just want to break that down.
Yeah.
Okay, keep these thoughts in mind, because when we come back, we're going to talk about the Thanksgiving food, everything that we have to put on our tables. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to wrap up the show. Well, everybody is excited for Thanksgiving, the meal that is going to be on the table, but NBC News was recently gaslighting all of us, saying that this year we are going to have a historically affordable meal. Now, they go and compare prices back to 2021. You know what they didn't do? Right? Inflation really jumped up right about then. Could we go back to prices from 2019? Because if you do that, the numbers look a lot different. But again, this is just what the media does. They're going to go out there and say, oh, it's fine. Just go back to 2021, you guys. Everything's better than it was then.
I don't understand how these numbers games still matter. Because I feel like, why would I trust them on anything, right? I mean, they lie about stuff all the time, and it's not like super complicated lies. They'll just look at you to your face. We remember the Biden graphic from back in the day, just telling us, no, everything's fine. Thanksgiving is great. And I mean, does it have any effect on people, do you think, at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the biggest self-own that the media can do. I mean, it's one thing to talk about political issues and lie about them and be, completely deceitful. But it's another thing to tell you, oh no, this is, you could buy a turkey for $29.95.
Yeah. To our conversation tonight, though, we're just talking about, well, the media, they lie. We know they lie. Are things going to change? One of these, this is why they aren't in the same position of authority that they used to be in. And this is why Donald Trump, he went out there and won the election in spite of them. Can they not put these two things together?
Look, I don't think they care. Most of them, they are paid to do this, and they're the lemmings are gonna go off the cliff if they go off a cliff. I do think there are a couple, smarter people who are more strategic on that side who realize that something has to give, but they're a little confused about which path to take. With this kind of stuff during Thanksgiving, I mean, I just feel like it's a moment where this didn't work, demonstrably didn't work. They got hosed, they lost, and they're going to have to figure out a different tactic, because one of the most insane things about this, and it's probably the reason we keep talking about the numbers thing when it comes to food prices, is it's not something you can lie about. Mm-hmm. Again, that's why I don't understand. I mean, you're just telling people, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes, me or your own checkbook? And people have a sense of this because they have a sense of the reality in which they live. I mean, I don't want to talk about the media. I want to go to the real meaning of Thanksgiving.
The media doesn't even believe it.
Right.
Not one of the people who are writing this, who are putting it out on TV, who are, reading it on the news. I mean, ask them how much they're paying for Thanksgiving dinner, because it's not this. They're paying probably 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times this for what they're getting. And it doesn't seem to bother them because, I mean, also, like, you're in that particular you're insulated from reality. So if someone tells you, if someone tells Rachel Maddow or Joy Reid or someone like this what the average Thanksgiving dinner costs, I don't know. I mean, they might believe it just because they have no relationship whatsoever to reality.
Dave, what are the best and worst foods on Thanksgiving?
I've been obsessed with sweet potato casserole for a long time.
Good.
With the marshmallows and the whole thing. I mean, maybe I can eat a little tiny bit of it.
You're really going to let yourself go this week, I can tell.
Yeah. But when I get a chance to do it, I do. But like all the Thanksgiving food is great.
No, there has to be a worst. I'm not going to let you out of this. What do you not put on your plate?
Worst?
You avoid it.
I don't know. I mean,
the correct answer is green bean casserole, in case you're wondering.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, okay,
He's
on my team.
I could do green bean casserole.
That canned cranberry stuff, I'm not down with, but some people are. I think the key is gravy. I mean, we didn't say this last time, but the real secret of Thanksgiving is
it brings the entire plate together.
Good gravy.
Well, I mean, turkey is overrated, just in general. I mean, if we could throw a brisket on there, people would be a lot happier.
Yeah, that's what we did in Arizona. Again, because it was warm weather and who actually cares? You can eat whatever you want when you're in Arizona and it's still 100 degrees outside.
That's
true.
I come from the cold weather places. I think there's truth to this. I think you may be exaggerating. People can still feel the spirit of Thanksgiving in these places. But, I get the point. It's different. I think the key is you do turkey just because you have to be inventive about finding a way to make turkey not dry, right? The whole point of Thanksgiving when it comes to how do we make turkey without the turkey being dry, because turkey maybe isn't as good as some other options, but you figure that out, and it's sort of like a problem that certain people like to solve, and that's great. And then you just have some other meats, right? You get your other meats in there and mix it up. But if you don't have gravy, like really good gravy, then the whole thing doesn't matter, because that's what ties the room together.
Well, and it's almost what saves the turkey when it is inevitably overcooked.
Oh, for sure.
You have to have that gravy on there.
Stuffing also, though. Can we go with stuffing?
Really good stuffing is hard to beat.
Yeah.
Really good, high quality.
I didn't know which way you were going to go on that, though, if it was going to be good or bad, because people have very strong feelings about this.
No, anyone who doesn't like stuffing is wrong. I mean, the right kind of stuffing, mashed potatoes and turkey, those are like your triumvirate of their basis. And then the gravy is going to tie everything together. And if it doesn't go with gravy, you don't like it with gravy, then it probably doesn't belong on your plate.
Well, and everybody's going to have like that crazy uncle. I hope you're that crazy uncle. Honestly, if you're watching this show, they always say, don't talk about politics. No, bring it up. Let's go. We won. It's okay for this one and this one only.
Yeah, what are you thinking about politics? I feel like everyone is emboldened and ready to do it, ready to talk and say all the things this Thanksgiving.
Look, I hope so. Let's get it on.
Let's keep the good vibes rolling, because we don't know how long they're going to last. But until then, we're just going to enjoy the great food, the great company, and the great victory that we've had since November 5th. Everybody out there, have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks so much for joining us here at Blaze News tonight. Be sure to go out there and subscribe to the podcast, and we'll be back with everything else here on Monday.